Okay, guys, so today we're gonna shift our focus from multiplication to division. So again, it's gonna be building on, right? So we're gonna do essentially everything that we've done so far. Okay, so non-permissible values, simplifying, multiplying. There's one additional step that we're gonna do today because remember, dividing is the same thing as multiplying. Okay, as long as you do there's just one extra step that you have to do, but once you apply that step, your division essentially changes into a multiplication, right? And just to refresh your memory, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you to do this starter question. So ask yourself, what is that one step that I'm asking you to do? Do that, okay? And then simplify this, but simplify this using, factoring, okay? So don't just multiply everything out and then simplify at the end. Simplify at the beginning and then multiply everything out, okay? So pause the video, try this out, but I'm going to proceed. So what the additional step that I'm talking about is changing this division into multiplication. So you can do that. Okay, so 3 over 15. I'm going to change the division into multiplication, and I can do that. But there's always a price to pay whenever you do something like that, right? And the price to pay is that the fraction that comes after your division will get flipped, okay? And when you flip that, we're talking about the reciprocal, right? So you have to multiply this by its reciprocal. So the 10 essentially will go on top and the 9 will come underneath, okay? So that's the price that you have to pay, okay? And then now you can multiply this out and then simplify after, right? So, but because that's something that's really difficult to do when you're dealing with rational expressions, the best strategy, right, is to simplify at the beginning. Okay, so I'm gonna, well, 3 I cannot factor 3 because it's a prime number, but 15 is not. So 15 is 3 times 5. um so you know what, I'm just gonna put dot in here and then just use the multiplication symbol in between, okay? So, and then 10 is not prime either, right? So 10 is 2 times 5, and both 2 and 5 are prime. And then 9 is 3 times 3, and both of them are prime. Okay, so you cannot factor them anymore, okay? And using the strategy from that last class, right, all you have to do is just find stuff in common and then cancel it out. Okay, so 3 cancels with this 3, this 5 cancels with that 5, and the only terms that survive are 2 and 3 and 3, right? So that means this will become 2 over 9, okay? So this class should look just like yesterday's class, right? The only thing that changes over the only thing that's changing is this, right? And we can change this to what yesterday's class looked like, okay? So that's the only change that we're doing, okay? And if you understood yesterday's class, then today's class will hopefully make a lot of sense. But if you did not understand yesterday's class, then today's class will be, again, a nice review um, for the ideas to sink in, hopefully. Okay, so let's scroll down. Okay, one thing that I'm going to point out is that, whenever you get a question like this, just factor everything at first, okay, and then find the non-permissible values, right? So why you have to factor everything? Because again, you have to simplify the whole thing, right? If the question was find the non-permissible values, then you only have to factor a denominator. But here you have to be careful, okay, because it's division. I'm actually going to point this out in a moment. So let's just factor. So this, right, the first numerator is just difference of squares, so I'm going to get x plus 2 and then x minus 2, so that wasn't too bad. The next one over here, right, two terms, both of them have an x, so I can pull out the x, and if I do that, I get x times x minus 4, right, because x times x will give me x squared, and then x times negative 4 will give me minus 4x. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. I'm just gonna, I guess, keep the division symbol for now, okay, and let's just factor the top part. So the top one over here, so I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -6 and they have to add up to 1, okay? So again, try 1 and 6, probably not gonna work. 2 and 3, 2 and 3 I think will work. Okay, so 2 and 3 gives me 6. So one of them has to be negative. So because this is positive, that means the smaller one has to be negative, right? So minus 2 and 3. Okay, so that means that, because the coefficient is 1, right, you can just use the shortcut. And in most cases, your coefficient will be 1 because, they don't want you to, um, because if it's not 1, then it takes a little bit more time to factor. Okay, so that's why in most cases it will be 1. Okay, so then you look at the first combination, it's minus 2. So x minus 2, and then x second combination is 3, but it's positive, right? So this one's done. And now let's factor this guy. So for this one, I'm just going to do it on top over here. So two numbers that multiply to something and add up to something. So what is that something? So two numbers that multiply to negative 20, right? Because it's 1 times negative 20. So negative 20, and they have to add up to 1, okay? So again, try with 1 and 20, it's not going to work. 2 and 10, it's not going to work. 3 doesn't divide 20, so obviously that's not going to work. 4 and 5 I think will work, okay? Because 4 and 5 are like 1 apart, right? So that's why I know that it's going to work. So 4 times 5, 4 times 5, but one of them has to be negative. And because this is positive, the smaller one has to be negative, okay? So, oops, so the smaller one has to be negative, so minus 4, minus 4, okay? So that means this is just x minus 4, right, because of my first combination, and then x plus 5 because of my second combination. Again, guys, be careful, okay? I am doing this very quickly because my coefficient is 1, okay? So I can use the shortcut. Um, but don't get in the habit of just doing this and then, oh, it's x minus 4x, right? Don't get in the habit of doing that. Be very careful with your coefficient because sometimes they're going to give you coefficients that are not 1, and you will just do what I'm doing over here and then get everything wrong. Okay, so just be very careful with that because they're gonna throw that curveball at you in your homework questions or on the test or whatnot. So just don't just like when you do math, always think about what you're doing. Okay, don't just blindly follow steps because if you do that, then they're gonna um, trap you with those curveballs. Okay, so just be very careful. Okay, so I know this is pretty fast, but because we're lucky, this question is has coefficients 1. Okay, so I really want to point that out. Now here you see, because it's division, we actually have to be very careful with our restrictions. Okay, so for this guy, the restrictions are the same, right? X cannot equals to 0, x cannot equals to 4. Now over here, my restriction is this, right? These guys cannot equal to 0, so that means x cannot equals to 4 and x cannot equals to negative 5. But in the next step, I'm going to have to multiply, and then I'm going to be flipping these guys, right? So when I flip, then I have to make sure that these guys are not equals to 0, okay? So essentially when you're dividing, um, there will be additional restrictions because neither your numerator can be 0 nor your denominator can be 0, right? In this step, your denominator cannot be 0. It makes sense, right? But once I multiply in the next step, I'm gonna have to flip those guys, right? I'm gonna have to flip it. So that means my numerator cannot equal to 0. Okay, so if you want, let's just do this one step at a time. Okay, let's just do this one step at a time, and hopefully it will make more sense. So the restrictions over here, right, are um, x cannot equals to 0 and x cannot equals to 4. Restrictions over here are x cannot equals to negative 5 and x cannot equals to 4. Okay, but now in the next step, what you'll have to do is, so let me just rewrite this: x plus 2, x minus 2, x minus 4, right? So once you change this division symbol to multiplication, division division symbol to multiplication, right? Then there's a price to pay, and the price is that you're gonna have to flip the second fraction. Okay, so this guy will have to get flipped. So the x minus 4, x plus 5 will go on top. So x minus 4, x plus 5 will go on top, and x minus 2 and x plus 3 will come down, right? And now I'm going to have these additional restrictions, right? So I'm going to have these additional restrictions. So here my restrictions are x cannot equals to 2. Let's just put them in increasing order. So x cannot equals to -3, x cannot equals to 2, okay? And now let's combine everything together and put the restrictions over here if you want, okay? So what do I have? I have -5, right? So -5, right? So x cannot equals to, you know what? Let me just write this in blue. So again, I'm just writing it in increasing order because that's the convention. So -5, and then the next guy is -3, right? So x cannot equals to -5, x cannot equals to -3, and then you have 0, right? And then 2, and then 4, but the 4s are repeating, so you don't have to put that twice, okay? So the next one is 0, and then you have 2, and then you have 4, and that is it, okay? So you don't have to put the 4 twice. So these are the values that your x cannot take, okay? So to save yourself some time, right, what you have to understand is that this guy obviously cannot be 0. This guy cannot be 0, but now because this is division, this also cannot be 0, okay? And you can find all the restrictions one shot at the first step, okay? Which is what I'm going to do moving forward. But I wanted to point out why the numerator cannot be 0 anymore, right? Um, so let's just clean this up a little bit, okay? And now all you have to do is just get rid of the common terms, right? So I have an x minus 2, x minus 2. I have, just be careful, okay? This, you know what? If it's really bothering you, why don't you just put a dot, okay? Because that was not an x, okay? That was a multiplication. So maybe just use dots, okay, moving forward. I don't know, like just try to avoid those that the classic multiplication symbol, because that will confuse you with the x, okay? So don't cancel this x with that multiplication symbol, okay? Like this, okay? So that's why I'm changing it, okay? Because some of you might, because when you do the test, you're stressed, and then sometimes you might forget that it's actually a multiplication symbol and not x. Anyway, so x minus 4, x minus 4. What else is there? X plus 2 doesn't cancel with anything. And then x plus 5 is on top. Okay, so these guys survive then. Okay, so the final answer is x plus 2 survives, right? So this guy and that guy, so x plus 5. And then at the bottom, you're going to have x and x plus 3. Again, don't be tempted to cancel this x with that x, right? Because this is there's a addition in between, and that's why I'm putting brackets, so that you can kind of like convince yourself that the x and the 2 are attached together, okay? They're not separate, so you cannot just cancel them, okay? The x plus 2 will only cancel with an x plus 2, not an x, okay? So this is your final answer. So yeah, so there's going to be some additional restrictions over here, because now you're dividing, okay? I'm just going to double check my answer. X plus 2, x plus 5, minus 5, minus 3, 0, 2, 4. Yeah, this looks perfect, okay. So I thought there would be more simplification, but no, this is it. Now, pause the video, right? I want you to try this question. So go ahead and try this out. The first step, guys, is to factor the whole thing, right? Because you're going to have to simplify. Um, and then once you factor the whole thing, the non-permissible values will be more apparent, right? It will be easier for you to see what the non-permissible values are. Just be careful, right? Because this is division. Neither your denominator nor your numerator can be 0, okay? So factor everything. I'm going to ask you to pause, try this out. I'm going to continue. So um, okay, so let's start with the numerator over here. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -7, and they have to add up to -6. Okay, so 7 is a prime number. Okay, there's only one combination that will work, 1 and 7. But obviously one of them has to be negative. Now, because this is negative, that means the bigger number has to be negative. Okay, so minus, yeah, 1 times minus 7. Yeah, so this is perfect. And now because your coefficient is 1, guys, right? Your coefficient is 1, you can use the shortcut. Okay, so this just becomes c, right? The first term is 1 plus 1, and then c minus 7. Okay, so just your combination will guide you. Now you see you have c squared minus 49. You see nice square numbers separated by a minus sign, right? So difference in squares. So take the square root of this guy and this guy. So c plus 7, and then rewrite that with a minus sign, c minus 7. And then you know what? I'm just gonna flip this right away. Okay, I'm just gonna flip this right away. So now let's factor this guy because this is gonna be my um, numerator now, right? So I'm just flipping it right away now. Okay, so here, right, the c's are repeating themselves, so you can factor a c, and then you're gonna be left with c plus 7. Right? Again, this is going on top because I'm changing this to a multiplication. It's no longer a division because I don't want to rewrite this again, okay? And you can totally do the same thing, okay? Now, let's factor this guy. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 7 again, and now they're gonna add up to 8 because both of them will have to be positive, or is it minus 8? Okay, it's 8. So 1 and 7, right? And then 1 and 7. So this just becomes c plus 1, right, using the combination, and then c plus 7, okay? And that is it, guys. Okay, now that you've factored, you can easily find your restrictions. Okay, so I'm going to find the restrictions. Again, careful because your restrictions will come from your denominator here, but also your numerator, okay? Because remember, this numerator was initially underneath over here. So you have additional restrictions now, okay? So restrictions are, so let's just go with the, increasing order. So here you have minus 7, right? And this is 7. This is minus 1, minus 7, and then 0, and then minus 7. So minus 7 is the smallest one that I can think of. And then I think there's minus 1, right? Minus 1 comes from here. And then the next one is 0 from here, okay? And then 7, right? And then 7. So I have one restriction. So this one is the smallest one, minus 7, minus 1. So always target your plus terms, I guess, right? Because your plus term will always have negative restrictions. So this one is minus 7, minus 1, 0, and then 7. Okay, so those are your restrictions. Again, I'm not going to show the work for that, right? If you guys want to work this out, if I'm doing it a bit too quickly for you, then do it however you were doing it. I'm just because the restrictions things, the restriction or the non-permissible value is no longer the focus now, right? My focus is to do other things in this class. So hopefully you're comfortable with that by now. So again, c plus 1, c plus 1 is repeating itself. C minus 7, c minus 7 is repeating. And then c plus 7 and c plus 7 is repeating, right? So this just simplifies to the terms that survive, right, are c and then c plus 7, okay? Everything else gets canceled out. So your final answer is c over c plus 7. Okay, and again, right, this guy only has one restriction because we've lost most of them while simplifying. Okay, so which is why you always have to find your restrictions at the very beginning once you've factored everything, okay, that needs to be factored. In this case, it's this denominator, and that numerator, okay? So let me just clean this up a little bit, and I think that is it for today. Oh no, there's actually one more question, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, there's one more question, and this one's going to be slightly longer. Okay, so this will take most of my time. Now, what if, there's a division and a multiplication? What will happen now? Okay, so um, whenever you have a so then now you have to do BEDMAS. Okay, remember this is not equals to something, right? It's not equals to something, so you're not solving for anything. So in this case, because you're simplifying, when you simplify, you have to use BEDMAS. in forward direction, okay? So that means in this case, addition, division, and multiplication have the same priority. You just have to do whichever one comes first, okay? So here, you're just gonna have to change this division into multiplication, then multiply these two together, and then whatever the result is, multiply that by this, okay? So it's just a mixed question, but the logic is still the same, okay? So the only tricky part over here is this guy, okay? This guy, I really hate this question because now my coefficient is not 1. So before I start doing anything, I'm actually gonna factor this guy, and this will take quite a while. Okay, so I mean not that long, but it will still, because the coefficient is not 1, right? So I'm gonna have to do this without using the shortcut, because obviously the shortcut will not work. Okay, so let's start with that numerator. So let's factor everything, okay, and then find the restriction. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -30 and that have to add up to -7. Okay, so try 130. That's probably not going to work. 215 is not going to work. 3 and 10 I think will work. Okay, so 3 and 10, 3 and 10. So one of them has to be negative, but because this is negative, the bigger number has to be negative, right? So minus, minus, and there you go, okay? But now I cannot say that it's m plus 3 and then m minus 10, okay? Because my coefficient is not 1. So you'll have to rewrite the middle term in an intelligent way, okay? So let's do that. So this is 2m squared plus 3m, right? The 3 is coming from here. And then minus 10m, minus 15, okay? So this, guys, is still minus 7m. Okay, it's same as this guy. I've just written it in an intelligent way because now by doing that, I can easily factor. Okay, so let's factor. So the advantage of rewriting that trinomial in with 4 terms is because now you can use a technique known as grouping. Okay, so how does grouping work? You have to focus on the first 2 terms. Okay, and factor the something that you see in common. So over here, right, the only thing that I see in common is m. So that leaves me with 2m plus 3, right? Because if I multiply this out, I'm going to get 2m squared plus 3m. Now, once you get this term, this has to be the same for it to work. Okay, so 2m plus 3. Now, all you have to do is just ask yourself this question. What do I need to multiply 2m by to get minus 10m? Right, and the answer is minus 5. And then check, does minus 5 times 3 give me minus 15? Yes, it does, and it should, okay? Because, again, this is designed to work. Okay, so once you find the combination, right, once you find the combination over here, it will work, okay? And if it doesn't, then you'll have to swap the middle terms. Okay, sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes it might make more sense to put the minus 10m before the 3m, okay? So if you run into a problem, that will help solve that problem. So that's a rare case. I honestly don't know why that happens, but sometimes you have to do that, okay? That's the only thing that I know. So you factor right here, you see the 2m plus 3, 2m plus 3. You can see that they're repeating themselves, right? So you can factor that. So when you factor the 2m plus 3, that leaves you with m minus 5. So you're going to put m minus 5 inside the brackets, okay? So this, I guess, was the long part of the question. Everything else will be fairly straightforward, okay? I might need an additional page for this, so I can actually add a new page, so don't worry about that. Yeah, so now let's rewrite this question. So um, with all the factoring, okay, so this is the only one that requires some for me to show the work on the side. The other stuff should be fairly straightforward. Now this has 2 terms, so both of them have an m, right? So just be careful. You can factor the m, but there's something else that you have to factor with the m, right? You have a 2 and you have a 10. Okay, so when you have numbers, you have to find the biggest number that divides about 2 and 10, and that's 2. Okay, so you're gonna have to factor 2m. Okay, so when you factor 2m, then this becomes m minus 5, right? And you can check 2 times m is 2m squared, and 2m times minus 5 is minus 10m. So that, now I'm just gonna multiply. Okay, so you know what? I'm gonna put this symbol, okay, the dot. So the 6 will go on top, and 4m squared minus 9. Again, guys, nice square numbers, right? M is also squared. 9 is a nice square number. So difference is squared. Okay, so you take the square root of the first term. So square root of 4 is 2. Square root of m squared is just m, plus square root of the second term. So square root of 9 is 3. And then rewrite that with a minus sign. Okay, and then you have to multiply this by okay, so you have to multiply this by, so I'm just gonna point out something. Okay, see this 2m minus 3 looks very similar to sorry, 3 minus 2m looks very similar to 2m minus 3. Okay, so but it's not the same, right? This for example, this 2m minus 3 and that 3 minus 2m look very similar, but they're not similar. So when something like this happens, you just have to factor minus 1. Okay, when you factor minus 1, the negative 2m will become positive, and the positive 3 will become negative. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, see, I just factored minus 1 over here. Why? Because I know that this question is designed to work, and this 2m minus 3 is just begging to get cancelled with a 2m minus 3, but I have a 3m minus 2, which can be changed into this 2m minus 3. Okay, so it's just, you just have to be you just have to kind of like understand how the questions work, and once you do enough practice, you will get to that point. Okay, so I'm just gonna put this over here, minus 1 times 2m minus 3, okay, because this is more advantageous for me. Okay, now let's cross things off, right? So let's see what will happen. So the 2m plus 3 will cancel with the 2m plus 3. The m minus 5 will cancel with m minus 5. The m survives. The 2m minus 3 and the 2m minus 3 will cancel. The 2 becomes a 1 because 2 divided by 2 is 1. And the 6 becomes 2 divided by 6 is 3, right? If this is really bothering you, this step, then think about it this way. Remember, 6 is just equals to, right? So let me rewrite the 6 in an intelligent way. So 6 is just, if it's really bothering you, 2 times 3, right? So now you can just cancel the 2's, and then you're gonna be left with that 3, okay? But remember, this is all multiplication, right? So there's actually a multiplication over here. So that means on top, I have 3 times negative 1. Actually, I don't think I'm gonna need more space. So 3 times negative 1 is actually negative 3, right? And then in my denominator, I only have the m that survived, right? Yeah, so it's minus 3 over m. Minus 3 over, sorry, minus 3 over m. Oh, and there's one thing that I forgot. The one thing that I forgot is the restriction. Okay, so I think they're asking you for the non-permissible values. Okay, so my restrictions are, right? So this is where I'm gonna find my restrictions. So I'm just gonna erase all this stuff so that I don't miss anything. Okay, so my only restrictions, guys, because this cannot be 0, right? So initially this was a division, remember? So neither my denominator nor my numerator has to be 0, but this is not an issue. The issue is only these two, okay? So my restrictions are, if you want, I'm going to add a new page. I think I will have to add a new page. So I'm just going to write my restrictions over here, okay? So yeah, I think I'm just going to stick with blue. Oops. Okay, so restrictions are m cannot equals to, over here cannot equal to 0, over here cannot equals to 5, So let's just work this out and then we'll put everything together. So m cannot equals to 0 and m cannot, I don't know how to remove this. Just give me 1 second. Okay, how do you remove this? Okay, it's gone. I didn't know I could do that. Okay, so sorry, wasted a lot of time over here. So m cannot equals to 0, right? I'm focusing over here, and m cannot equals to 5. Over here it's slightly tricky, right, to figure out what, so maybe if you want you can solve this. But if you do, I'm not gonna do the calculations for you. So it's just gonna be minus 3 over 2, right? So m cannot equals to minus 3 over 2. And for this one, it will be 3 over 2. And now just put everything together in increasing order. So the smallest one is minus 3 over 2. So m cannot equals to minus 3 over 2. M cannot equals to 0. M cannot equals to 3 over 2. And m cannot equals to 5. Okay, so those are your restrictions. Um, and that is it, guys. Okay, so now for the homework, okay, again, do all the questions you so there's only 2 videos for the week, right? So you will have Wednesday the entire day to work on all the questions from last class and this class. And if you have any questions, please send me an email. And once I have enough questions, I think I could make a separate video and post that so that I don't have too many questions for Thursday, because that's when I'm going to be holding office hours. So if you have any questions, just send me an email. And then once I have enough, I could potentially make a video, right? And on Friday, you'll have your optional quiz, okay? And that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much.